the best part about the module was that every single question had a very detailed sort of a solution wherein you can actually analyze why exactly is a particular option wrong. I mean, if it's a very difficult or a tricky question, usually it's very easy to identify the two closest options. So actually analyzing the wrong option and why exactly it's wrong, that helped me. But towards the end, like I guess the e-GMAT module, the scholarium part was, I believe, the best section to actually test my abilities, because the question bank was very comprehensive, to say the least. So I targeted the particular video lectures and the question set which were there. I mean, on the scholarium, I could actually just select the questions from these particular topics. So I was able to target these weaker points more effectively.
Hello everyone, a very good morning, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to another debrief session with e-GMAT. Today we have with us Yashraj, who scored a 695 on his recent attempt. So welcome Yashraj, and thank you for joining in.
Good evening, and thank you for having me, ma'am.
So Yashraj, I was going through the score report that you had shared with us, and we have it on the screen where you scored a 695. And what makes it all the more extraordinary is definitely the Q90, that we see a perfect score, and then a very well-balanced B83 and a DI81. So huge congratulations on the balanced score here. Okay. So while you were giving the test, did you get a hint that things were going as planned and you would be able to get to your target score?
That's a very tricky question. I mean, I was very confident with my quants. Everything was sort of going as per my expectations. In the data insight section, I believe there were certain questions wherein I did not feel very confident. And in my verbal section, I felt fairly comfortable based on the number of mocks I had given. I was able to actually time the section as per my expectations, because usually I would face a lot of issues with regard to the timing towards the end. So I felt very comfortable on the test day.
Nice. And talking about, your entire journey. So why don't you give us a little bit glimpse of how you decided to start with your GMAT journey, and what was your biggest challenge that you faced through?
So actually, I had previously given the GMAT Classic Edition. That was around 2 years back. I had received a score of 680, and I was set to join a university, but due to certain issues, I could not. So currently, the exam has been revamped, and there's a Focus Edition. So I wanted to improve my chances of getting a good score and subsequently a scholarship. So I decided to reattempt the examination. During my previous attempt, I had actually used the e-GMAT module, which particularly helped me in the verbal section. The sentence correction and the critical reasoning modules were very helpful to me. So since the new exam pattern was, somewhat, I was very clueless about. That's why I sort of just went through the modules or the free material initially, which is there on the e-GMAT portal. And I found that to be a very good fit. And that's how I came about, I repurchased the module. So so that's basically what happened.
Yeah. And talking about your verbal, because you just mentioned that this was a little bit of a concern area. So earlier when you used to solve your verbal questions, such as your CR, RC, what was your approach and how did that change after doing the course?
So, I was already using e-GMAT previously. My fundamentals basically aligned with the program. I was working with the pre-thinking concept. I was actually breaking the question or the RC section into chunks. Basically, once you're reading a particular paragraph, you're sort of paraphrasing what exactly happened and why exactly has the author written it or structured the passage in such a way. So I was already accustomed to those ways. But I felt that since the newer format does not have sentence correction, the accuracy aspect in the critical reasoning, which was always somewhat of a concern for me, that was somewhat highlighted. So during the e-GMAT, the modules, I focused more on the conceptual parts, and then the quizzes which are there, the harder quizzes which are there, on which it is explicitly mentioned that, it's let's say a 700 plus range question. So I focused on those particular sections a lot more, because that actually helped me later on when it came to the timing aspect as well. Because in the easier questions, my pre-thinking was way more concise and way more accurate. So I think all in all, PGMAT verbal module really helped me because I was having a very erratic performance. On certain days, I was scoring very well. On certain days, I was not scoring well at all. And the best part about the module was that every single question had a very detailed sort of a solution wherein you can actually analyze why exactly is a particular option wrong. I mean, if it's a very difficult or a tricky question, usually it's very easy to identify the two closest options. But on a high difficulty question, it's somewhat difficult given the time constraint. So actually analyzing the wrong option and why exactly it's wrong, that helped me, the solution, the detailed solution. So I think in those aspects, e-GMAT really helped me because I was completely clueless.
Yeah, we are glad that we could help you. And I think, you mentioned a very crucial point that, getting stuck into answer choices and then making sure that you are eliminating everything by having a logical reasoning. I think it plays a very, very crucial role, especially in verbal improvement. Right. Now, talking about your quants, Yashraj, at this point, you are at 100 percentile. It's a perfect Q90. Right. When we look into your stats, we see that, it was not always that case because I was looking into your NP and you started off with a pretty modest score. Okay. But later on, if you look into your accuracy, it's been 70%, 80% consistently, right? Overall, your timing has also dropped to a great extent. That means the application, the process, the clarity also set in after some time, right? So when you look back at your journey in your quants, what were the key skills that you developed along the way that helped you actually make that beautiful mark of a Q90?
So I was always fairly confident with my quant section. I mean, more compared to my verbal. But still, there was some of the topics wherein I was actually facing a lot of difficulty. So number problem, as you rightly mentioned, was one of those key areas. And I always struggled in that particular section because the type of questions or the range of questions is very vast. And questions can become very tricky in this particular section. So when it came to questions, let's say with regard to LCM, HCFs, so the higher difficulty questions were always a pain point for me. So I went through some of the video lectures, just targeted at those concepts. So that actually gave me an idea as to what is the complete range of questions which can be asked. There might be certain variations to that as well. That's true. But once you have a decent understanding of what exactly the concept is, so for me, that HCF, LCM section, the factorial questions, those were a weaker point for me. And apart from NP, probability and PNC, these are my weaker sections. So I targeted the particular video lectures and the question set which were there. On the Scholarium, I could actually just select the questions from these particular topics. So I was able to target these weaker points more effectively. So that somehow really helped me in increasing my accuracy and at the same time decreasing my response time as well.
Interesting. A very, very focused approach towards your weaker section, right? And what about your practice methodology, Yashraj? What were the resources that you used, and what were the strategies that you would make sure that you're applying during your practice sessions? How many questions did you go about solving?
So during my, my latest attempt, I was not working. Previously I was working, so I could not dedicate a lot of time. But currently, I had taken a break and I could dedicate my entire day to solving questions. So I already had purchased different, question banks from the official mba.com. So I was solving a lot of questions. I also had previous OG versions, and some of the questions were somewhat different. So I solved the OGs from 2021, I guess, and the latest one. I solved all the questions which are there. On a daily basis, I guess I was solving around 120 questions across all the three sections. So that sort of helped me because after working for so long, I was not in the groove. I needed a lot to get back into that, competitive examination flow. So I was solving everything I came across. So some of the free material which I came across on the internet, I also solved all the questions which I was able to get my hands on, like from GMAT Club, every free content or free material which I I was getting, I was solving. But towards the end, like I guess the e-GMAT module, the Scholarium part was, I believe, the best section to actually test my abilities, because the question bank was very comprehensive, to say the least. I mean, there were hundreds of questions across different topics. So I was solving, I solved all the questions which were there, like apart from my previous attempt. So I think having that sort of ingrained in you, that really helped me. Like the number of questions which I had solved was quite high compared to most of the other applicants, like I know. So I think even though I was not studying a lot, I was still, somehow in a decent state, like mentally.
Yeah.
I mean, if that makes sense.
No, it completely makes sense. Another interesting thing that, I could pick up is that you mentioned that the previous time when you were attempting for the GMAT Classic, you were managing your work and your GMAT prep, while this time you were completely studying full time. So a lot of students, while studying full time, it becomes difficult for, staying motivated or managing their schedule well. So what would your ideal schedule look like?
So like when I was working, so my schedule looked completely different. Like when I compare both of my attempts. So when I was working, like I would always give a mock in the morning, because the exam schedule or the timings back in that center, like my previous center, I would always have the attempt in the morning. Like that was the only slot available. So I would always try to study as much as possible in the morning so that my body gets used to it. Like there's no lethargy. Like if I wake up, I should not be, my brain should not be very foggy. I should be as quick as possible, like even in the morning. So most of my preparation was focused in the initial few hours. Like I guess from 5 in the morning, I would study for 2 to 3 hours. Then throughout the day, I did not have the opportunity to. And at the night, I would always maintain. So I always maintained an Excel log with regard to my responses, the sections which were weaker for me, my error log. I would always maintain separate Excel sheets. So towards the end of the day, I would always browse through those sheets to sort of get an understanding as to where I'm lacking and what my approach needs to be like for the coming few days. So that was the previous attempt. In this particular attempt, as I mentioned previously, initially I was solving a lot of questions. So in the morning, primarily, again, I was solving mocks, like either free mocks or through or the Sigma mocks. And after that, since again, going through those mocks is somewhat painful at times, after that, I would sort of pick up on a stronger section. For me, that was the quants. So I would solve 20, 30 odd questions more, or I would go for data insights. And after that, after my lunch, I would sort of go for a recap to analyze where I went wrong, what needs to be studied. And towards the end of the day, the second half was entirely dedicated to verbal and data insights. I spent the initial part of my preparation, I spent a lot of the time on the data insights section, because back when it was integrated reasoning, it did not have the same weightage. In the Focus Edition, since it has a lot of weightage, I wanted my attempt to be as good as possible. So I worked a lot more on my fundamentals in the data insight section. So during the second half, I would go through all the video lectures. And then towards the end of the day, also, I would give a condensed mock. There's an option on the Scholarium. So I would either go for a sectional mock or a condensed mock. So basically, like the three parts I bifurcated my day into, like out of those three, two were dedicated to giving some sort of a mock, because I would always sort of panic during the GMAT exam. So I did not want that to happen under any circumstance.
That's true. I think, seeing those numbers make a huge, huge difference when you're taking those sectional tests and the mocks. It helps you build that confidence also. On that note, I was going through your e-GMAT mocks, and especially in the DI section, I noticed something very interesting, that your scores were consistently within that ±1 range, right? And eventually on the test as well, you were able to score a great score, like a DI 81. right? So how important is it to have that kind of predictability that, is it once you started seeing those numbers, that's when you decided that you were ready and it's time to take the test?
So actually, there was a time constraint for me since I was giving the exam in December and most of the deadlines are towards the end of the month. So it was not particularly because of that. That was more of a happy coincidence for me. But I was consistently scoring well in the video lectures. Like for data insights, every single lecture has a post quiz.
Yes.
So once my accuracy increased, the numbers sort of gave me a lot of confidence actually. As you had rightly mentioned earlier, that the numbers played a very important role for me because that's when I came to know that I have a certain level of fluency when it comes to a particular topic. So I believe that was one of the very important things for me because since I did not prepare a lot for my data insights, I mean, since I was winging most of it based on my IR section, so having those numbers played a very important role in building up my confidence.
True. And that's totally understandable, right? Now, talking about the sequencing, Yashraj, there's a lot of questioning on how do you sequence, and because there is certain kind of section adaptability, right? So while taking the mocks and the actual test, what was your sequence of order for the sections and what?
Sure. So the sequence that I had chosen was the first section would be quants, followed by the data insight section, and the last one would be verbal. So I started off with quants because that is my strongest section. So I wanted to start off on a good note because that adds to the confidence, at least on the D-Day. So I started with the quants and then I wanted to be done with all the calculation part because once you're in the zone, I mean, at least for me, that was quite applicable when I was solving quants questions. And then I switched to the data insight section. There was also an aspect of quants to it. So I was somehow sharper. I mean, that is what I felt. So that's why I went for the DI section. And since the DI section also has some elements of verbal to it, so I mean, I was sort of getting activated for my next section as well. So it was sort of a bridge because since it has elements from both the sections, that sort of worked in my favor. This particular sort of a sequencing. And after the two sections, I always took the 10-minute break, whether I was giving a mock or during the exam. And then I followed it up with the verbal section because I wanted some sort of a rest. So that was my routine for the exam. Like that was the mindset behind it.
Yeah. Right. And I truly believe, and I couldn't have agreed more, that, starting with a section that you're confident in and comfortable really sets the tone, because you know that this is a section that you would be able to tackle even if something really goes off, even if you get those hard questions in the beginning. And it played out really well for you because, while it was on the test as well, you were able to get that perfect Q90, even though Quant was the first section out there. Okay. Now, talking about your test day experience, Yashraj, so why don't you walk us through your test day experience and how were the sections lined up? And because I remember in our previous conversations over emails, you mentioned the number of questions that you did get incorrect as well to a certain extent. So why don't you walk us through your test day experience?
Sure. So my test was scheduled on the 9th of December. Like I had chosen the morning slot, like that was actually the slot that was available. So I went for the exam. I took the exam as per the particular section sequence. Like it started off with quants. So actually, it was a very tricky section for me that day, unfortunately. Like I started off on a very strong note. I remember solving the first question within 30 seconds. So I was very confident and somehow I got stuck in three questions. I remember the second question being one of them. So that was actually never the case for me, that I was stuck in three questions. So luckily there's a review system now. So like I completed the entire section with those three sort of false responses to those three questions. I completed it with 20 minutes to spare. And then I focused entirely on those three questions. Towards the end, I was luckily able to get all of them correctly. Then the data insight sections, once I started working on it, I felt fairly confident because my timing, at least in the MSR questions, because usually that was the weak point which I faced during my preparation. either I was scoring exceptionally well or I was not scoring at all. So my performance was very erratic. Luckily, I got a question set wherein I felt very confident. So uh, everything was going as per the plan, but then some of the two-part questions, they were quite tricky. And unfortunately, I ended up spending a lot more time than I had anticipated. So I guess that's where I lost some of the points. I could have scored a bit higher on that particular section. All in all, I was able to get 12 questions correct. Later on, I realized that 3 of the questions wherein I had spent lesser time. I mean, I was expecting a correct response. I got those incorrect. So I guess that was a silly mistake at my end. So that's how the data insights section ended. And the verbal section actually started off on a very bad note. Like, I don't know whether it was the nerves, but what it was, I'm not sure. So the first 3 questions were quite tricky. As in, I was not able to understand a lot. Like, I thought that I was just being rusty. But somehow, since I have given so many mocks, I was somehow able to, get back into the groove of things. And then I started solving the questions in a very methodical way instead of panicking, because I've worked on creating a certain set of habits and I've relied on them for such a long time. That really helped me during that very difficult time. So ultimately, I was able to complete the entire section with almost 15 seconds to spare.
Beautiful.
I mean, it might not sound a lot, but for me, that was monumental because
Definitely.
it was very difficult for me. And the best part, like I felt, was that I was able to get 20 questions correct in my verbal, like which I mean, if you just go through my mocks, that never happened. So that was a very happy surprise for me.
Yes, yes. I think it was just meant to be. Sometimes, it's all about, it's a combination of ability and what happens on the test day that gets you to the target score, right? And I think for you, it was your day. It was just meant to be. And with, proven ability in scholarly niyam, done official questions for practice, it was something that, had to happen, right? Now, when we look back at your journey, Yashraj, because, you have given 2 attempts so far. Previously in the GMAT Classic, you mentioned you got a 680. At this point, you are at a 695. So when you look back at your journey, what would be some key learnings that you would want to share with the other GMAT aspirants?
So, I mean, for each of these sections, I would have a very specific learning actually. Like I'll start off with my weakest section, which was verbal. So for verbal, I guess the most important thing which helped like me actually improve my accuracy was analyzing every single option. Like after solving the question, that is, like once you're analyzing your responses, just try to go through every response and analyze why a particular response was wrong, like out of the 5 options, because some of the more apparent options might have very extreme wording, but the closer ones do not. So it's very important to develop a habit of why exactly a particular option is wrong, because that sort of creates an instinct or an intuition for a difficult level question. So that was for verbal. For data insights, I believe analyzing the number of questions which you can get correctly, like solve correctly. I mean, out of the 20 questions, I had sort of made up my mind that I would be solving around 18 of them, because some of the questions, they may not be very difficult, but they might require a lot of time. At least for me, in 2-part analysis, like I would end up spending a lot of time. So one needs to identify where exactly their strengths are and what are their weaker sections. So they can manage the time accordingly, because 2 minutes and 15 seconds for a question, like let's say if it's a table analysis question or an MSR question, wherein you have 3 other questions apart. So that time vanishes very quickly. So identifying a very realistic number, like let's say if you're able to just go through 16 questions, at least you can improve your accuracy in those 16. Like that is the type of mindset I sort of tried to adapt, like try to inculcate with regard to data insights. And when it came to my quants, as I mentioned, like I targeted the specific weak areas which I had, like the particular topics. So that sort of helped me in my preparation.
Right. I think you're very well summarized, Yashraj. And the points, while you bifurcated into a subsectional level, I do believe to a certain extent they do transparently, break the shackles because, such as look. Make sure that you're analyzing every answer choice, right? And spending time, right? Working on your weak areas. These are something that go beyond just that particular section. These are something that can be applied effectively across the sections as well, right? So on that note, Yashraj, I think this has been a very, very interesting session. And I would really like to take this opportunity to thank you again and congratulate you again for taking out the time and sharing your insights with us. And we wish you all the best for your applications. And we would be more than happy to assist you in any which way possible. So all the best, Yashraj, and thank you for doing this today.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, man.